the hour.
Start the recording lady now.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. How's Dr. Charles today?
Pretty good. I just had a brisk walk, and I need that
Oh, okay.
coffee to be good to go in the morning.
Yeah. Were you being chased, or you just did that on your own?
Fortunately, not chased. I'm pretty quiet. I don't think I could get away from anybody. What about you? Do you exercise?
You're seeing it right now. Except for mealtime, you know. Well, I try to include my exercise in everything I do, as opposed to separating it out.
Yeah.
And I try to incorporate that into lots of areas in my life, partly because I think I'd like to try to be integral in my actions, so that I don't know if this will work or not, Charles, but one of my ideas is make things organic, part of what you do, who you are, as opposed to separating the little boxes out, you know, because usually I find that when I do that, when I separate the little boxes out, they don't fit together.
So you're doing
Hi.
Hi, Lillian.
Lila, actually, but
Lila.
okay, so
Lila.
I wanted to kind of respond to that. Being like having integrity, being the same person everywhere. I try to do that too, and right now I kind of have a little dilemma with it.
You have say that again. You have a little what?
Little dilemma with it. Like I'm thinking about
Okay.
a decision right now. I think it should be kind of an easy one, but it's kind of not, because I was offered an opportunity to get the hell out of Europe for good, and actually die the way I want. And then and then I realized that first, in order to be let out or let in, whichever, I would need to do something that I really don't want. Yes, and I'm speaking of what you're thinking of right now, because apparently the government decided that I need it. So there's a little conundrum for you.
Yeah.
Like, do you compromise your convictions in order to get what you wanted for about 20 years, or do you get stuck in the same place and hope that you can get the same thing where you're at, which is not really likely, because honestly, it's about my envy of the Second Amendment. So,
yeah. Well, I think we should put that on our agenda to have a discussion about things like that, Lila. That's right, Lila?
yeah, that could be interesting.
Yeah. That would be a very interesting topic. Today, our topic is persuasion, and it kind of will have some impact on what you're talking about, but it's not directly to that. So I try not to get off the subject and go to something else and wander around in the desert, which I'm very likely to do. But persuasion, and well, welcome everybody, first of all. So when I'm talking about persuasion, I'd like to take a look at and have you share with me observing the kinds of things that persuade you, how you are persuaded, and how you persuade others as well. the elements of persuasion. Now, there are many different levels and ways that we're persuaded. We have cognitive processes where we're aware of, or at least kind of aware of, how we put the world together, how we put the universe together that we experience. Each of us experiences the universe in something of a different way, even if it's that we can't stand in the same place at the same time. So just that small thing means that I see something different than you're going to see it. No matter how close we are, it's going to be different. As I have pointed out on a number of occasions, if you just put your finger in front of your eyes about midway and close and open one eye versus the other eye, you'll see that the perspective changes. It looks like the finger's moving, but the finger's not moving. It's just you're looking at the finger from a different position. And so if one head with two eyes can see things different, that different people are going to see something different if they stand or move from a different position. So that's one of the elements, and especially in the cognitive arena. But there's also the subconscious arena, things that are persuading us, things that make us feel a certain way, think a certain way, act a certain way, that we are not really that aware of. They're there, and many of us are not even aware that the thing is there, let alone that it's influencing us. A good case in point is most people are not aware that their gut flora, the things that digest their food and makes it possible for them to live, they're not aware that those things influence your mood. They might think that they just do the food thing, but there's a whole colony down there, and part of the things they do is they influence your mood. There are things like weather, how much water is in the air, or the temperature, and all of those kinds of things will influence you, whether it's a foggy day, cloudy day, rainy day, or sunny day. You can feel almost immediately, even before you get out of bed, even if you can't see out of the window, there's something different about a day where there's sunshine out, and you can feel a different way, depending on what you feel. But those things set us up to be persuaded in one way or another. It influences how we're persuaded. People that we know, and have some connection with, how we feel about those people, we're a little bit more aware of that. But it's useful to think about how just who says something becomes as important as what is said. Even though that person may or may not have any inside knowledge, it's our connection to that person and how we feel about that person frames what we will think about what is said. And you can see that play out every day. The colors that a sign is painted in will influence how you think about what is printed. The difficulty in reading something will have some influence on how you are persuaded. So the fonts, meaning the style of type that the thing is printed in, will have some influence on how much you are persuaded by that argument or whatever is said. For example, if we make an extreme example, if we print something in Times or Times New Roman, it will be read and thought about in one way. But if we use what I sometimes refer to as a ransom note fonts, where every, sometimes people have they have so many options of which fonts and they don't know which ones, and they keep changing the fonts to all the different words because, oh, it looks nice, but overall it looks like a ransom note, that's a whole different kind of way that you experience what you read there. Or the difference between if something is black and white or if it's printed gray on gray. One, the gray on gray is not going to be read, especially if it's a small type, as closely as the black and white in 12 points fonts or are above. So those kinds of things influence how we are, the degree to which we are influenced. So I want to explore that more with the idea of helping all of us to discover some things that we didn't know before about how we are influenced. So now I want to open this up to our group here and pose a question of what do you think are the major persuaders, we might even say influencers? What are the things that you are aware of that influence the ability of something or someone to persuade you?
Can I start?
Yes, sure. We were wondering when you were going to start.
Well, for me, the biggest one is past experience, but not just mine, but that of people I know and that of historical experience, because that's what I studied. And that was my whole world for at least for that intense 3-year period when I was kind of required to get into it. But also, basically just comparing things to past experiences that if something looks familiar, I'm gonna hone in on it. Like, for example, I and a whole bunch of friends I have, due to some controversial thoughts, have experienced involuntary commitment. And what I'm noticing is that those who experience that are kind of more aware of, or more assign more importance to things like bodily autonomy, and that made the last 2 years rather interesting. And there's also like the historical thing. After this involuntary commitment period, I got into things like the Cold War. And again, that made the last 2 years very interesting because that contained a lot of these persuasive techniques and kind of made me think of where is the line between persuading someone and coercing them. And everybody's line is different. It's a sensitivity spectrum. And mine is kind of hair trigger level at this point because I know too much. But
so did you say Cold War? Yeah,
and especially the way it worked on our side of things in the Second World, because obviously that kind of affected my parents and the people around me. So I don't know much about the other side, but what I have noticed from what little I've seen is that the more this thing dragged on, the more the sides and their persuasive techniques started to resemble each other, which is very telling, very interesting, because It's like that Nietzsche quote, when you look into the darkness, it looks back at you.
Yeah.
And I also noticed that the same scapegoats were used in some cases.
The same what?
Um,
The same what was
scapegoats.
used?
The same scapegoats, like the same
Oh,
minorities were the bad
scapegoat.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for example, both sides kind of went after queers, which is like weird because
Mm,
if you're the opposite of each other, how do you have the same target?
yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe not in all ways there, but thank you, Lila. And we will pick up on some of more ideas. We hope you'll have more things that you'll share with us. Anyone else has any ways that they see that they are persuaded, or things that influence being persuaded?
Well, I think you consider the source.
Mhm.
So I'm most persuaded, I suppose, by the credibility of the source and the extent to which the source's information is substantiated by facts.
Mm.
And so that's the main thing. I think it's also human to be self-interested when someone is trying to persuade you of something. And it's harder to be persuaded if whatever it is goes against your self-interest.
Can you expand on that a little bit, Charles?
Well, I was thinking about your topic just before we started, and I was thinking of that old adage: "A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still."
Yeah.
And so I Googled it, and one user of it was Dale Carnegie in his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He's got a chapter called "You Can't Win an Argument." Well, it's been too long since I've looked at that book and know what that chapter is about, but I do think that there is a human tendency to resist believing even in the face of the facts if it goes strongly against what you feel. So there's a head-heart difference there, maybe, well, okay, I see the facts, but my heart of hearts, I'm still not buying it,
Yeah.
There's a resistance. There's a resistance, I think.
It's also sometimes not just the facts, but the different situation. Like, not everybody wants the same thing. So, for example, if somebody doesn't want to live, you're not going to convince them by this thing will actually make you live longer, right? So not everybody has the same interests, the same priorities even. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I acknowledge it, but do I really want that?
Yeah. So
there's also the matter of enlightened self-interest, So if you're going to persuade somebody of something, it would be good to find ways to persuade it via their persuade him or her via his or her self-interest. How might I best appeal to this person with this argument based on what I know he or she prefers, wants, likes, favors. So there's that.
Well, along that same line, getting people to understand what it is they want, and you also to understand what it is they want, that is a major, that's can be a major influencer / persuasion. And Carnegie talks about that in that same book you're referring to, Charles, that, a lot of times if you are not aware really what this person wants out of the deal, so to speak, you could be arguing against it because you don't really understand that they're actually on the same page. You just have to present it in a way that they see that the thing that you're offering them is the thing that they want, because sometimes they don't know, because they haven't thought about it in a way.
I'm curious, Lawrence, what do you think of his apparent idea that you can't win an argument?
I thought it was a compelling argument.
How so? What's his point?
Okay.
Because
Okay,
I haven't read that book forever, so I don't know what his explanation.
Well, his point, you were actually making his point, and his point in not being able to win an argument is because when someone has an emotional stake in a certain position, everything that you say, even with all the facts, what they're not operating from a factual point of view. They didn't get there by having a set of facts that they added up and say, like my grocery bill, and say, okay, this is $9.99, right? And if I add it up 100 times, it's going to be $9.99 if I have the same items at the same price. They started with $10 sounds like a nice number. So it doesn't matter what you put in the cart, and it doesn't matter what the quality of the thing is or what the packaging is, it's going to be $10 at the end of the day because I needed $10, and then if you tell me that, your math is wrong, man, that means nothing to me. All I have to do, what I need to do is just hold the fort, so to speak. I'm not changing. Everything you say to me makes me feel smaller, and you're challenging me as a human being. You're not challenging my idea, because the idea wasn't like formed in the way that you're talking about. So you can't really, and it's especially when a person has an ego stake in that position, you're not going to move that needle. On the other hand, if you reposition your argument so that that person thinks that they are making the decision, you didn't change their mind. What you did is have them rethink about it, but you didn't tell them. A Japanese lady actually taught me that long before I had heard of Dale Carnegie, and we were talking about how Japanese women handled their men as opposed to American women. And she pointed out, she said, let's say, I remember this story, it was so clear. She said, let's say that as the wife, I'm responsible for choosing the school that my son is going to go to. That's, and that's part of not only my responsibility, but almost in a certain sense, my right as the partner in this relationship. That's my territory, right? So she said, well, let's say that I'm married to a guy that no matter what I propose, he's going to be against it. Time has shown me that. She said, I know that I can't go in and say, I think Hito should go to this school X. She said, I know I can't, because if I say X, I know he's going to say, nah, that's not good. So what I will do is I'm always making friends with the wives of his friends. And so what I will do is when I decide the school that I think Hito should go to, I will enlist one of my friends who is the wife of one of his friends. And I will just say, I was thinking of this school and I got this thing and here's, it's good and blah, 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 blah. She say, and then I know that my husband will ask one of his friends, I will just say, boy, this is a hard decision. And so my husband, wanting to bring something to the table, he will go to his friends. And one of his friends will say, well, I heard that so-and-so, because he heard it from his wife. He probably won't say, I got this from my wife. He'll say, I heard this school is pretty good. So now the husband will come back and say, I think Hito should go to school X. She never said anything, But because he thinks it's his idea, he's selling it. And then you say, well, really, Daddy? You really think it should be? And he'll say, yep, that's the way it should be. She said, the difference is it's not important for her to feel like I won. It's important for her to get Hito into school X. And she knows what that is. And she works on that, not having her ego stroked.
How do you do that in politics, though? Because this is a lot of effort, even in family context. But when you're like on the spot with somebody else from the other side of the aisle, you don't have the time and resources to do that.
You do it. You do it like I would say, and I don't want to hog this conversation. I want other people to, to input here, but I would say you do it by recognizing what are the influencers. For example, in marketing, they don't sell, if they want grandma to buy something, they don't try often to sell it to grandma, they sell it to grandma's granddaughter, because they know the granddaughter is going to be a bigger influence than they are going to be. I mean, certain things. I'm just making a case. And in the same way, that's what diplomats do all the time. If they're successful, they don't go in straight ahead and say, you're wrong, I'm right, change. They don't say that. They know that that's not going to work.
The funny thing about that is what that made me think of is that's how the bad guys got the younger generation to be against the traditional hardware of their parents and grandparents and pretty much everyone. I'm talking about the 2A thing, because what I'm noticing is that a lot of my generation and younger are more likely to be anti-2A, and it drives me nuts, because I know that like my first reaction to that is, what is wrong with you? And in reality, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that their environment is not giving them the picture that not giving them the entire picture for that matter, and not giving them any sort of chance to be otherwise. Like there's a lot of scaremongering, a lot of misinformation, a lot of we just want to save your lives, blah blah blah, and they don't have the training of, for example, somebody who was actually mandated at one point to just know how to use one.
Yeah. Well, we don't do critical thinking very well. I mean, that's not a big thing in anywhere I found, but I want to open it up because to other people. Anyone else have an idea of like what kinds of things are persuasive? What things do you see that persuade you or persuade others? Anyone else? Well, it's happening to us all the time. I mean, we're being persuaded. Maybe we'll come back to that. But what do you think persuasion is? Maybe we'll ask the question in another way. What do you think persuasion is? Anybody? Well, that may point to part of our, I don't, maybe problem is too big of a word or too serious of a word here, but if we don't know what something is or the element is, then it's kind of hard to grapple with it. It's we don't know how it's affecting us. So let's look at, was there somebody was saying something? Oh, Let's look at what kinds of things persuade us every day in life. What kinds of things, what kinds of people persuade us and or others? Anybody?
Well, I'm going to say that it's a difficult thing to grasp. Because first of all, as you say, we have to acknowledge that we're being persuaded, because you say that we are. And so my mind doesn't go there readily, but I'm agreeing with you. I'm persuaded, but I can't think of very many situations where I am persuaded. So I'm probably unaware of it.
Mm-hmm. You hit the nail on the head, Carolyn.
Okay.
You hit the nail on the head, because that is what, in fact, is happening. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to explore this subject, to bring it top of mind, so that we understand that, not only that we are being persuaded, but that it's happening all the time, and usually without our consent and or knowledge. But if we start to recognize how we are being persuaded to do things that may or may not be in our interest, then we have a chance to come close to this vague idea of free will. I'm not sure what that actually means in real time, but we can have at least be aware of what's happening to us. Any ideas of some things that you can point to when you think of like an idea or something that you want, something that you desire? Maybe it's not a political idea, but whatever idea you have, it could be politics, it could be religion, it could be family relationships, how you think about your relationships with your family. Chances are you didn't come to that conclusion in a vacuum. You didn't just sort of like pop up with that. There was something, maybe that person was always there for you. And so you're persuaded that that is a good person, or that is a person who is valuable to me, because whenever I hurt, that person came and cared about me. That's persuasion, and they may not think of it in that way, but that's certainly key to persuasion.
Is that a bad thing, though, to be
No.
there for people and help them?
No. Persuasion is not necessarily bad. There's not a value judgment on it. It's just a
But
thing.
I mean, you did say that it happens without consent, and that, as a woman, kind of freaks me out.
Yeah. Okay. So, but the thing is, if you say, it's without consent, it's not all of it happens without consent, but even the setup, how you feel, however you feel about yourself as a woman, you probably got that idea by something that you didn't have complete control over. It was just happening to you, right?
Well,
and you know what I mean? It's
by
like,
the way,
Hmm.
I was just thinking about this, that these ideas are a product of your environment, especially your early environment, and that's correct. But then that doesn't mean that these ingrained wrong ideas cannot change. For example, I can think of one of these. Like when I was a teenager, it was really subtle. Like nobody said it outright, but everybody kind of expected me to one day have kids, and I thought that that was the only option. And well, that idea changed because first of all, I was freaking scared of it, and I had to kind of persuade myself out of it in order to basically accept the situation. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes it's like you are raised with something, and you yourself, you don't fit that idea, and that's what persuades you to change it. And sometimes people just don't think about these ideas or don't question them because, hey, I fit this definition, I like it, so why change it? It's comfortable. When it gets not exactly comfortable, then you're like, okay, what?
Mhm. So you're talking about persuaders, right? Environmental persuaders.
Yeah, but I do wonder, where does that other factor come from?
What do you mean
Because
other factor?
we all have the same external cultural influence environment kind of thing in a given segment of the population,
Mhm.
but some people still end up sorry, moment. Some people still end up being outliers, and where does that come from? Because um like what's the difference? What does it take to like initiate that?
Initiate what?
That conflict that I was talking about, that most people are comfortable with the stuff that they are raised with, but
Mhm.
there's always a minority that's like, hey, what's going on? And where does that come from? Where does the questioning come from?
Well,
That would be interesting to know.
it sounded like you answered your own question because you said, well, you feel uncomfortable with that. It's like it's like shoes. You go into a shoe shop and people design shoes for some kind of abstract person with, but they don't think about you have corns, and there's so
Mm,
many, or they don't think about your middle toe or your second toe is longer than your big toe. And there are people with that.
so
And so
basically comes to biology.
yeah. So I mean, but what I'm saying is this: the people who make the shoes, they're not thinking about you have a longer toe. And that toe will make the shoes feel different for you, right? Like it's just the same as when you design a city, you don't design it for people who are blind, even though there are people who are blind. But you should make accommodations. But we're only getting around now in design to think, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of people who can't see. And those people that's our brothers and sisters, and we should care about them. We should be inclusive. There are people who resist that idea, but it's mostly because they never heard it before. Once they realize that you too, by just a twist of luck, you could be blind too in the next few seconds. Thing could happen for you, then you would want that there for you. As people get that, then that becomes a persuader because they can see it. But before that, like, there are all kinds of feelings that each of us have that don't fit with what the rest of us have, right? But we decide, well, I don't want to tell you everything. Someone else.
Lawrence,
Yeah.
that's probably why, this is Jace.
Uh-huh.
That's probably why they have think tanks
Yeah.
in businesses and marketing and so forth, because they have a variety of people that have a different perspectives on different things. And then they can put their ideas in there, and then they can come up with the best approach to try to sell whatever they want to sell.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I was thinking when you all were talking, that persuasion, that's a nice way of saying manipulation.
Mhm.
And so you can manipulate, and you can situations to fit whatever you're trying to sell.
Mm.
And so that's kind of, so in that way it would be kind of negative in a way, but not for people that are trying to sell shoes or whatever they're trying to sell. So but I think probably a real clear case about manipulation would be cults and the loss of free will, and trying to encourage someone to become a part of your group, and giving them all the information that you think that would help them to be happier and a better person, or they could live their life in a better way if they joined us, if you become one of us.
Hmm.
And so I don't know, I see that as a real clear example of manipulation. And also I, I don't want to name any particular groups, but you know, they've been in the headlines in the last couple of years, not recently, but to see people, whole masses of people drink some sort of juice and
Kool-Aid.
die on a
Yeah.
tarmac.
Mm.
You know, there's something that has really happened, that you have really brainwashed, or you really manipulated people into thinking that this is, well, it'll be okay because you're going to go to heaven now, or you're going to be redeemed, or you're going to now live the ultimate good life. And for me, that's faulty thinking.
Mm.
But for people that are searching for the truth, they're searching for something that wants them to that they want to feel at peace, what we talked about last week, or happiness, or some semblance of a positive life experience. You know, that it makes me sad that that's how they feel, that they have to attach themselves to that situation. I know this is kind of far out, but
No, I think that's a very good example, Jace. And I would like to go on the other end of that, because I think I think that the point you made is a very good one and a very good example, you know. And but it's not, I don't think it's like black and white. I think it's like some kind of continuum. So I want to go to the other extreme and say, let's say you are a parent with a 2-year-old. Okay. And the 2-year-old is really excited about fire, and they want to play with fire. Well, even if you're going to let them play with the fire, you want to teach them in a safe way where, one, they don't get hurt, and two, that they don't burn down the house. But the 2-year-old has no idea at that point of like, okay, this fire works okay in this situation, and it's very pretty in the fireplace, but it can get out of hand, and then you'll just have the fireplace and there'll be nothing else around it, you know. So how do you persuade the 2-year-old, you know, that, hey, you know, like right now you don't have the facilities to like judge what this fire can do and control it. Eventually you will, but not right now. So we'll let you over in this thing. You can play with this thing so that you get used to controlling fire. I mean, I'm trying to think of the most pristine kind of way where you're actually manipulating by persuasion this child to
Not
do something.
necessarily. It's not necessarily the same thing though, because
No, it's not.
2-year-olds and like very young kids
Mm.
are way more likely to be easier to be persuaded than adults, because first of all, you're mommy, you're always right.
But you know some different kids than I know.
But like you're the protector of them, you're the source of everything they need, blah blah blah. So it's kind of more likely that they realize that, hey, this person knows a little better than me.
Let me interrupt you for just a minute. Do you have a 2-year-old? Have you ever had a 2-year-old?
No, but I was one.
I thought you didn't, because you know that the guide word for 2-year-old is no.
Yeah, well, that can be the other extreme. It depends on also how you treat them and stuff. But it's still like not. It's different from persuading a middle-aged person, because you're dealing with somebody who doesn't have a lot of preconceived beliefs yet. So sometimes it just works that I said so, blah blah blah. But I just wanted to point out that you made the best and most underused argument for teaching basic self-defense rules and firearms knowledge at a very young age, because that means that, yeah, you take away the curiosity a little bit, and that means that they're not going to do anything that they wouldn't want to, because the knowledge will be there first, and then the curiosity and the interest, if there is going to be there, something like this. So basic safety rules are good to teach first. And we use that argument a lot, but not many people listen to it, I guess.
Char- Charles, you were going to say something? You look
No,
okay.
just listening.
Yeah. And Carolyn, did I cut you off? Were you going to say something else?
No, I was just listening again. I'm trying to figure this out. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. And anybody else too, if you have something. I want to just make sure everybody gets a chance.
I remembered what I wanted to say about the kids are easier to persuade thing. Thomas Aquinas has a quote on this one. He says, "Give me the child in the first 7 years and I will give you the man." So basically, if you drill it hard enough in the first 7 years, you're gonna get a religious person. And that's most often the statistical case, if not with every kid.
Well, it just so happens that you don't really have to drill much. They will just be what their environment makes them. That's their formative years where they're creating. So if you're there are certain things and patterns and habits that are a person lose sight of why I feel this way. You know, they may not know, but that continues to happen. And I think if Thomas Aquinas had met some of the marketing people, he would realize that it's not the end at 7. You know, you can actually change people, and people do. People go start doing and feeling things completely opposite of what they were taught. We used to think that people they couldn't learn languages, the brain wasn't plastic. Well, we know that's not true anymore. You know, the brain is still plastic. It still can be, maybe you have to use different techniques, but it's still plastic. So that brings us back to persuasion. You know, what are the things that take advantage of the plasticity, moldability of the brain? What do you think?
I was thinking back to that story you told about the Japanese woman, and how it dramatizes something maybe she didn't have in mind, closed-mindedness.
Oh, yeah.
She's in an intolerable situation. I understand to some extent the cultural context for it, but you know, why remain in a relationship with someone who refuses to accept anything you have to offer as reasonable? It's outrageous that she would have to try to persuade this man via the wives of his friends. You know, there's no possibility in that relationship. You know, what she's doing is enabling his closed-mindedness, you know, and completely surrendering herself to him, which is, I think, obscene.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, epidemic in our country these days, closed-mindedness, you know, and refusal to entertain alternative possibilities. And, you know, what are you going to do with that? There's nothing to be done with it if that's the way he regards her. She needs to ditch him and get a life and get a life. and be interactive with somebody who gives what she has to say some credibility. And for me, I don't know if this is where you're going with all this, but it's back to my larger concern about our society and the extent to which closed-mindedism and absolutism is just rampant, I think. How are you going to persuade someone who won't entertain the possibility that there's any reality other than his own, which he is,
I would like to,
which
I
he's
would like to
decided
respond.
upon and case closed, you know? What do you think, Lawrence?
Well, what I think is that she was dealing with it like pretty much the way we deal with it. In other words, look, this is the hand that you're dealt with. What do I do with that? And you can ditch that person, but then what are you going to get? You know, you still need to live. And also, if your relationship is like, maybe that person provides something else for you, even the emotional support, and they're not perfect, but they're imperfect in that way, even to the point that that in that culture, it's expected that that you're supposed to feel that way. Much the same as early in our culture, if a man was beaten by his wife, he was punished. You know, in the early part, he was put in the stock and put out in a public square and ridiculed for being beaten by his wife, because that was completely unseen. Well, we have different ideas now, but that was the hand that he was dealt with. So the person is going to be acting toward his significant other in a way that his society supports. Now, is that right? No, I'm not trying to make that case, but I'm saying like sometimes that's what people have, like when they are in a culture where politically, for example, or religiously, they can't see a way, so they have to cope. So what's the solution? You find a way to take advantage of the situation, which is what she was trying to make the point is, look, the guy's a knucklehead. I know he's a knucklehead, but I'm going to choose a school, but he's going to pay for it. You know, he has to have something, you know, let's say he's not developed that way, but he is developed enough to pay for, school. And so I'm good with that, because that's more important to me than my personal feelings of that he accepted it because he accepted I have as good ideas as he does. I know that the fact that he doesn't know it is not really a thing. You know, I know that I'm smarter than he is. He may even know it, but he can't admit it, because then that would lower his self-esteem.
He is, you know, she's not doing him any favors.
No.
By giving in to his knuckleheadedness. Nothing will ever change for him unless she asserts herself. And if she can't, then she ought to get a better life. You know, I think you get to a point with some people where you just have to move on to whoever is more open to possibility. You know, I thought as a teacher, finally, that you can't be preoccupied by the one lost sheep, the one who refuses to be. You can't spend a disproportionate amount of time with the one person who refuses to be reasoned with. It takes away the time you ought to be spending with those who are open to possibility. And I used to tell young teachers that do everything you can, but you know, you will finally come upon recalcitrant people who are, at least in that circumstance at that point in their lives, not open to possibility. You know, don't beat your head against the wall. Do whatever you can for everybody else. And so, you know, back to your example, that woman is not doing that husband any favors by conceding to him that she's worthless mentally.
Yeah, well, I don't know.
You use the operative word enabling. That means that, yes, she is basically teaching him to stay that way. But I would like to go back to the way she was one time before they met, perhaps, persuaded by the environment and by the culture that she is actually worthless and that this is what she deserves. You cannot ditch somebody if you know that you don't deserve better. You have to get to a point where you're like, hey, really, this is all I deserve. This is bullshit. By the way, I was I was at that point when I could not enlist because of this. I think I thought that I was worthless as a person, period. And I agreed to jobs and situations and relationships that were completely wrong and bad. But that was the thing. I even had to realize that the ending I wanted, which is 45 to the heart before 40, that I deserve that, and I can give that to myself without the institution giving it to me. Right? So you have to learn that somehow, because otherwise you're like, that's your reality.
Well, you make some very good points. Both of you are making some very good points. I'm very glad you brought that up, Charles, because I think it's important to recognize that, especially in this particular woman's case, and in fact, with most of the Japanese women I know, they're not convinced that they're inferior at all. They're not, quite the opposite. But they see themselves as like, okay, this is the hand I'm given. I can't say that, oh, I should have 3 more aces. And I can't, and there's only 4 aces in that pack. I can't say, well, let me go find another ace. There are no other aces. This is what I've got. This is what I have to deal with at this moment. Yeah, I could leave this guy, but I also need companionship. I also need, even if this guy is not the best guy for me, where am I going to get another guy? Even if it's not money, even if it's just, and that's often it, but even if it's like, okay, just companionship, where am I going to get that? And then is that person going to have another deficit that I like even less? So I'm not saying that it's the best thing and that women don't deserve more. I'm just saying that this is their coping mechanism. And many Japanese don't get married. In fact, that's one of their things, like we're having a thing like that now, it's coming to us now, is many young people, as they decide that, hey, look, that I'm not going to stay in that kind of situation, they're not getting married. And not only that, they're not having kids. They have made that decision, you know? So I think that it takes time for us as a society to like have these kinds of conversations, really. And these kinds of conversations are the persuaders. You know, they're at least they give you new ideas, like you just brought up, Charles. It's like, hey, you know, do something different, you know.
No,
And
I agree with you, though. I see that the story about her as the woman is wise, and she found a way to make it very workable. And that's the society we live in. Do I want to go and confront everybody that I think needs to be persuaded? No, there's soft, gentle ways of persuasion. So I see her as wise. I agree with you.
But it's also a kind of lying, which I don't think should be encouraged in society because it's already a problem.
Wait, you're lying? Yeah,
Yeah.
they're lying, but those are coping. Lying is a coping mechanism. You know, I mean, that people lie because they don't feel that others can handle the truth, you know, or the desirable,
yeah.
or the desirable outcome. They're not going to get the desirable outcome, you know. At least that's been my experience, is mostly people lie because they think, well, if I tell this person what it really is, they won't cooperate, they won't do the thing that I want them to do, right? So,
Well, yeah, but the ethical question of that is, do I really want to control everyone? Like, I'm mostly talking about the media, the most known liars in the planet. Like, what's the limit of that? Because it can get to a very weird point where you actually convince a world that there is something dangerous that actually isn't, and everybody freaks out, and
Yes.
then what?
Yeah.
Like, again, the past 2 years were interesting because of this.
Yeah. Well, this is developing into a very interesting discussion. Sometimes I think we should start at the second hour, because people start to get the ideas, and they're arranged in their head, and they have contributions. And we're in the first part of this, not so much, because we're now at pretty much 11:30, and that's the end of our program. But I hope that there have been at least a couple of things that will spur some challenge, or at least some interest in noticing how you're persuaded, who's persuading you, and how you persuade others. Is it gentle persuasion, or is it like do this or else, and do you help people to come to a decision that you want them to come to, or do you manipulate them? Do you look at what they need in terms of what you're persuading them to do? Are you persuading them to do something that is also in their interests as you see it? And then are you making them aware of that, so that when you do try to persuade people to be something different, that it is not just sort of what I want and moving people around, but what do we want? All of those things are part of the discussion about persuasion. So we'll
I
yeah.
think you pointed out a mistake I'm making. Because again, this comes back to 2A things. I've become pro 2A hardcore because I never had that. I never had that right. And it's like a little kid seeing a rich kid throw out something that he could never afford.
Mm.
And there's a strong element of why the hell do you want to take away something that other people think is valuable, and helpful, and sometimes actually can save lives.
Mm. Mm.
And I have not considered what the other side actually wants, and whether we want the same thing, because they always talking about saving lives, and I'm like, me too, because defensive use fatal, that's the thing. And I guess that I should focus more on the fact that, yeah, we kind of want the same thing, we just think the way to achieve that thing is different.
Well, join us again next week for another conversation. But this is the end of our time, and so I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same station.